September 18, 1944. Arnhem, Netherlands. The damp morning air clung to the uniforms of the British 1st Airborne Division as they pushed cautiously through the narrow Dutch streets. Rain had left the cobblestones slick, reflecting the silhouettes of Churchill tanks lumbering forward, their engines growling like beasts in the mist. Sergeant Harold Whittaker, rifle slung across his shoulder, smirked as he watched a group of German prisoners being marched past. One of them carried what looked like a crude length of pipe with a bulbous warhead at the end. "Bloody hell," Whittaker muttered, nudging Corporal Davies beside him. "That's their wonder weapon? Looks like a plumber's tool." The men chuckled, dismissing the odd contraption as another desperate German gimmick. To them, the Churchill tank was a fortress on tracks. Its thick armor had shrugged off countless hits from Panzer IVs and even the dreaded 88mm guns when angled properly. Surely no disposable tube could threaten it. The column advanced, Churchill tanks grinding forward with infantry in tow. Civilians peeked nervously from shattered windows, the smell of smoke and brick dust heavy in the air. Somewhere ahead, German resistance stiffened. A burst of MG-42 fire rattled from a corner building, forcing the British infantry to duck behind rubble. The tanks responded with deafening roars, their 75mm guns blasting holes through walls. Then came the moment that silenced the laughter. From a shadowed doorway, a lone German grenadier stepped forward, his face grim beneath a steel helmet. He hoisted the strange tube, the Panzerfaust, and aimed at the nearest Churchill. A streak of fire erupted, the warhead flying with terrifying speed. It slammed into the tank's side armor with a thunderous crack. Whittaker froze. The Churchill shuddered violently, its armor plate buckling inward. Flames burst from the impact point, licking across the hull. The crew inside screamed as smoke poured from the hatches. Within seconds, the mighty tank was immobilized, its engine coughing black smoke before dying altogether. "Christ Almighty," Davies whispered, eyes wide. The men who had laughed now stared in disbelief. The crude tube had just torn open one of Britain's most trusted machines. The German grenadier vanished back into the ruins, leaving only the burning wreck as proof of the weapon's power. The infantry scrambled for cover, suddenly aware that every doorway, every cellar, could hide another Panzerfaust. The streets of Arnhem had become a death trap. The British realized too late. The Panzerfaust was no joke. It was a nightmare. The burning Churchill tank smoldered in the street, its steel carcass glowing orange as ammunition inside began to cook off. The British infantry crouched low, their nerves frayed. What they had dismissed as a crude pipe had just proven itself a tank killer. Captain Robert Langley, commanding the platoon, barked orders to spread out. "Keep your eyes on the windows. They'll be waiting with more of those bloody things." His voice carried urgency now, stripped of the casual confidence that had marked the morning. The Panzerfaust was deceptively simple. A disposable launcher, little more than a tube with a shape-charge warhead. German soldiers could fire it once and discard it, making every ruined house, every cellar, a potential ambush site. Unlike the cumbersome Panzerschreck, the Panzerfaust required no training beyond pointing and firing. Its warhead, designed to focus explosive energy into a jet of molten metal, punched through armor that had once seemed invincible. As the British advanced deeper into Arnhem, the weapon's presence became undeniable. Another Churchill rolled forward, its tracks grinding over rubble. From a second-story window, a flash erupted. The warhead streaked downward, striking the tank's turret ring. The explosion ripped through the steel, sending fragments flying. The crew scrambled out, coughing and bleeding, only to be cut down by machine gun fire from the opposite building. The infantry's laughter was gone. Now, every shadow seemed alive with menace. Soldiers whispered about Faustniks, the German grenadiers armed with Panzerfausts, who could appear and vanish like ghosts. The tanks, once the backbone of the advance, became liabilities in narrow streets. Their armor was no longer a guarantee of survival. It was a target. Whitaker pressed himself against a wall, rifle ready, heart pounding. He could hear the hiss of burning fuel from the wrecked Churchill behind him. The smell of scorched paint and cordite filled the air. Somewhere ahead, another German was waiting, Panzerfaust in hand. The British had underestimated the weapon. Now they were learning, in blood and fire, that the Panzerfaust was redefining urban combat. The British had underestimated the weapon. Now they were learning, in blood and fire, that the Panzerfaust was redefining urban combat. The echoes of the second Churchill's destruction rolled down the narrow street like thunder. Smoke poured from shattered windows, mingling with the acrid stench of burning fuel. British infantry scrambled for cover, their boots slipping on wet cobblestones as the realization sank in. The Germans had turned every ruin into a fortress armed with invisible tank killers. Captain Langley's voice cut through the chaos. "Stay low. Watch the bloody doorways." His men obeyed, pressing themselves against walls, rifles raised, eyes darting from shadow to shadow. The once confident advance had slowed to a crawl. Every step forward felt like walking into a trap. Inside one of the ruined houses, a German grenadier reloaded another Panzerfaust. He was barely more than a boy, 17, maybe 18, his hands trembling as he slid the warhead into place. He had no heavy weapon, no tank of his own, but with this disposable launcher he could bring down giants. He peeked through a shattered window, waiting for the next Churchill to rumble into view. Meanwhile, Sergeant Whitaker crouched beside Corporal Davies behind a pile of bricks. "It's the bloody houses," Whitaker muttered. "They're crawling with Faustniks. We can't keep pushing the tanks forward like this." Davies nodded, sweat streaking down his dirt-covered face. "Feels like the armor's just bait now. They're drawing fire straight onto us." Captain Langley gathered his men in the shadow of a ruined church. His face was streaked with grime, his eyes bloodshot. "We can't keep feeding them targets," he said, voice low but firm. "The tanks stay back. We go in first. Clear the houses, then bring the armor forward." It was a reversal of doctrine. Tanks had always led the push, with infantry following to mop up resistance. But against the Panzerfaust, the roles had to change. The weapon's short range meant the Germans had to be close, hidden in doorways, cellars, or behind rubble. If the infantry could flush them out before the tanks advanced, the column might survive. Sergeant Whitaker nodded grimly. "So it's house to house now. Bayonets and grenades." He checked his rifle, then motioned to Davies. Together, they led a squad into the nearest building. The air inside was thick with dust and plaster. A staircase creaked under their boots. At the top, a German grenadier lay dead, Panzerfaust still clutched in his hands, killed by shrapnel from the earlier firefight. The men pressed on, tossing grenades into rooms, firing bursts into dark corners. Each building became a battlefield of its own. Civilians huddled in basements, terrified, as soldiers fought above them. The British learned quickly. If they didn't clear the ruins, the Panzerfaust would claim another tank. Outside, the tanks waited, engines idling, their crews tense. They knew they were no longer the spearhead. They were vulnerable giants, dependent on the infantry to shield them from the invisible menace. By dusk, the street was littered with wreckage, burned-out tanks, shattered buildings, and the bodies of men who had underestimated a weapon that looked like a toy. The laughter of the morning was gone, replaced by a grim respect. The Panzerfaust had forced the British to rewrite their tactics in blood. Urban combat would never be the same again. Night fell over Arnhem, but the streets did not quiet. Fires burned in the husks of Churchill tanks, casting flickering shadows across ruined walls. The British infantry huddled in defensive positions, their nerves raw from the day's encounters. The Panzerfaust had carved its reputation in steel and blood. Word spread quickly through the ranks. Soldiers whispered of tanks destroyed with a single shot, of crews incinerated before they could escape. The weapon's name, Panzerfaust, tank fist, became a curse muttered under breath. Even hardened veterans admitted they had underestimated it. Captain Langley gathered his officers in a dimly lit cellar. Maps were spread across a table, candles guttering in the draft. "We're not dealing with armor anymore," he said grimly. "We're dealing with ghosts. Any doorway, any cellar, could hold a Faustnick. We move like we're clearing a nest of vipers." The officers nodded. The new tactics were brutal but necessary. Infantry would sweep ahead, clearing buildings with grenades and bayonets. Tanks would hang back, advancing only when streets were secure. It was slow, exhausting work, but it was the only way to survive. Outside, Sergeant Whitaker leaned against a wall, listening to the distant crack of rifles. He thought of the morning's laughter, the casual dismissal of the strange German tube. Now, that laughter felt like a betrayal. The Panzerfaust had humbled them all. In the ruins across the street, a German grenadier prepared another shot. His hands were steady now, his fear replaced by grim determination. He knew the weapon's power. He had seen it turn steel into fire. For him, the Panzerfaust was salvation, a chance to strike back against the armored giants that had crushed his homeland. The British would adapt, but the scars of Arnhem would remain. The Panzerfaust had proven itself more than a gimmick. It was a weapon that reshaped the battlefield, forcing even the most powerful armies to bow to its destructive simplicity. And in the days to come, as the Allies pushed deeper into Germany, they would carry with them the memory of Arnhem, the place where laughter died and the Panzerfaust earned its infamous name.